Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another session of Toward a Quality of Life. We're here almost in the middle of June in the year 2002 at the Roxbury studio of BNN TV, delivering to you another hopefully fine product for your viewing erudition. Well, today I'm here by myself, ready to take to the podium, so to speak, having to mouth many words, and there's so much to say, there's definitely not enough TV time to say it. But anyway, I'll try to cover a few things today. Now, normally, I would like to talk about psychology, philosophy, in the best of all possible worlds, talk about topics that are deep in our souls and have relevance to our deep core of personal existence. But unfortunately, some of the more practical, real, hardcore, in-your-face items slap you every day like trash blowing in the wind, such that I have to keep coming back with certain themes in a matter of priority, all of which are relevant, but in a matter of priority to our very existence of even being able to be around to talk in a sensible and decent way. And of course, the matters that are so pressing are environmental matters and the most horrible situation of animal rights. Further, there are some very serious, critical matters of politics, social policy, and cultural engineering that are extremely relevant to us in this present time. I'll see if I can even begin to touch on those, but because environment and especially animals are such a high priority need, I'm going to come to you with these two items at first, and we'll see how far we get, if we can even get through them today. So I'm going to start with matters on the environment, including genetic modification, hopefully. Now, at the time that I'm talking to you, if you watch television at all, if you've seen the news, you will note that Denver, or the area surrounding Denver, Colorado, is on fire, literally. Many, I don't know the number, thousands of acres have burned already for several days. The city is covered, at least at last report, with a thick smoke. Imagine all the animals that have died. Imagine the habitat that is gone. Imagine the oxygen rejuvenation from plant life that is not going to occur. Imagine what I believe the mayor called a nuclear winter when he looked out at what has been happening to the area right at Denver, Colorado. And this is because of drought conditions, and this is because of environment that is going to the extremes because of the way we are living, with conditions of severe rain that is way too plentiful, completely inadequate rain, which is way too sparse, severe heat, which is topping normal ranges of what should be high for temperature, and severe cold, which is going in the opposite direction, etc., etc., etc. Many kinds of, and winds, the likes of which break records, winds and hurricanes, winds and tornadoes. So we have Denver burning. This is very sad. I recently was out west. I was in Nevada and I was in Arizona, and I'm very fond of those areas, and I'm sure those of you who have been there have a place in your heart for them too. And to think that areas such as these are burning, because in Arizona as well, there were two massive fires. In Arizona, there is very little forest area. Everything is, much of it is desert and low-growing vegetation, sparse vegetation, very dry land. But there was one area in Prescott, Arizona, that had a lot of pine trees, very high, gorgeous pine trees. And just last month, that whole area burned for days, and Arizona lost the pine trees of the Prescott area. Another area of Arizona, I believe it was in Tucson, burned as well, and the third had to be closed down for fear of fire. Nevada is very seriously in a drought condition right now, a very dry place to begin with, and Los Angeles is having the driest time it has ever had in its history. And we continue to do things that are causing the earth to be out of balance, including having radioactive emissions, mishaps, and other kinds of incidents, even purposeful incidences, causing different kinds of molecular combinations, different kinds of pattern formations in what is going on in the upper atmosphere, to say the least of the depletion of the high level of the high layer of ozone to protect us, and the effect of the many kinds of chemicals and oxygen depriving deterrents that are going into the atmosphere. Oxygen and proper shielding kinds of deterrents going into the atmosphere. Now, those of you who have been in Las Vegas know how much water is used. I guess the water is funneled in from California, I believe, area, and maybe some from the Arizona area. And there is such excess use of water, such ridiculous use of water. Las Vegas is a great place. It's very fun, it's very hip, it's very cool. But in a way, it's a sin, unfortunately, because of all the extreme measures and waste of water going on, keeping man-made pools, man-made fountains, man-made vegetation, man-made lawns, man-made golf courses that in no way by themselves can sustain being there, and we require enormous amounts of water, even at a time eventually it just comes to that anyway, but now we're at a time where the chickens are coming home to roost, and there's a severe drought, and these kinds of excesses continue to be perpetrated, though Las Vegas is such an interesting place. Unfortunately, it's one that should not be there and goes against the foundation and nature of nature. Phoenix, Arizona, has had, I believe, 4% of its annual rainfall so far. Phoenix is facing a severe drought, and Lord knows that Phoenix hardly can do without the water. So you see, every time I've come to you with environment over the past couple, 2-3 years, it's always been horrible fires, one after another, droughts, horrible floods, all kinds of extremes, destroying nature. We can't do without these trees. We can't do without the forests. We need the vegetation to exchange the air, to exchange the carbon dioxide and give us a replenishment of oxygen for our health and welfare. We need the green trees for our eyes. We need the green trees for our eyes, for our shade, for our comfort, security, and serenity. The birds need the trees. The whole world needs the trees. Some parking lot developments are purposely installing trees now, unlike up till now, so that whole areas will not heat up to the excessive amounts as do the woefully unprotected pieces of tarmac that serve as parking lots now. Further, what about the smoke of horrible forest fires hanging in the atmosphere, to say the least of the smoke of everyday industry and the smoke of chemical fire accidents accumulating in the atmosphere, day in, day out? As I tape this supplementary section of the lecture, fire has ravaged even more of Arizona and continues to do so. Beautiful Arizona, where plant life is such a precious treasure. It is the way we develop land and log land and plant land to log it. And the climatic alterations we are fueling with our way of doing business that are ending in these painful results. Anyone who says that environmentalists have an agenda is right. Environmentalists want drastic and immediate change in how things are done to preserve our air, water, and land to the greatest extent possible. This requires an across-the-board drastic change in how we do business. The United States should be and has to be the role model for how to conduct national policy of caring for life and earth, instead of being the much resented global polluter in the eyes of persons watching and struggling with economies nowhere near as intricate as our own. Yes, it does matter what people think of us and what we think of ourselves as reflected in pure water. Now a pipe dream even as we speak. Fresh oxygenated air and land of good green health. It's frequently said that air quality is better today than, for example, 20 years ago. There's also a guy down the street who would like to sell you a Brooklyn Bridge. This is absolutely not true, no matter what studies or statistics are thrown at you regarding the statement that air quality is better today than it was before. Why are there so many alerts for high air pollution days, for people to stay indoors, especially those with respiratory and cardiac ailments, and often even persons without these ailments? You can travel rural areas or city areas of the country and come into zones of all kinds of toxic and wrong smells, from generic smog to chemicals used in construction, to chemicals used in industrial and residential maintenance and repair, to industrial plant operations, auto body work, printing, ethers of polyethylenes and various formed plastics, like the odor of products in electronic stores or clothing stores, pesticides, and a panoply of chemical olfactory bombardments to our sense of smell. It's not nature fresh and pure. Ladies and gentlemen, air quality is horrible. Take a deep whiff on an average street in the city of Boston. Our noses, in fact, continue to become desensitized to wrong chemicals because of olfactory and brain overload and habituation to the burden of sensory messages touching our nerve endings all of the time. Do not be oblivious to corporate and political agendas for corporations, to be idle on air quality, or roll back rules on air quality. Be aware that we must work harder to eliminate detriments to air quality and to our health. Where do you think so much cancer is coming from, if not, for one, from all the chemical crap around us? Now I'm going to tell you a sad story. It's a story about 250 million monarch butterflies dying in one fell swoop in high-altitude pine forests of Mexico this winter. Photographs on the internet would show you carpets of dead butterflies on the forest floor, as happened in January of this past year. These butterfly species are native to Canada and to the United States. When temperatures up north get cooler and days grow shorter, the butterflies begin traveling south to Mexico and some to San Francisco. The trip to Mexico is up to 2,500 miles. Along the way, the butterflies reproduce 4 to 5 generations. The last generation, instead of reproducing, flies to Mexico, to the high-altitude pine forest of Michoacan. In Mexico, the butterflies stay clustered together in the pine trees while winter is on. They only move about if the temperatures are warm enough to enable them to move. After winter, as the days grow longer and get warmer, the butterflies begin their flight north, and the cycle starts again. The sad story of 250 million butterflies never making it back north this year, January 2002, is due to the logging and fragmentation that has happened to the pine forests in Mexico where they stay. It is the fact that the environment they needed to survive had been pulled out from under them, as I will explain. I'd like to point out as an aside that there are certain patterns and paths that animals have to play out their lives, and the environment has to be there when they need it, each species according to its own biology. And this is even so for humans. When you think of the beauty and glory of how everything is timed and tuned, and then to think that when this last generation of butterflies was making its way to the south, to the place they always go to, that what happened is they got a very cold temperature, which apparently the butterflies could withstand, but it was first a wet rain and then very, very cold temperature, and they froze to death because the water was on them when the temperature got really cold, and they froze to death. And people had been saying that the pine forests of Mexico were being lost, and even though it got really cold, the butterflies were able to get shelter from the cold by being in the pines. But now the forests are degraded. They've been logged, they've been fragmented, and the butterflies did not have the protection of the pine cover when these severe conditions hit them, and alas, so many millions of them were lost. To think that a butterfly starts out as a little larva and a larvae, and then becomes a pupa, and then becomes a chrysalis, and then becomes a butterfly, and children should read about this almost miraculous phenomenon of the monarch butterfly and how it lives, and that it survives on milkweeds as it's a larvae at certain stages of its life, and then when it becomes a butterfly depends on the nectar of flowers and so on, and how each thing is timed and where the butterflies are and what they're doing at any point in time. And if someone put it, with the tiny little brain that the butterfly has, it's able to do these flights and routines and survive, barring man-made detriments to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as we go gung-ho in savaging what is left of our poor and gorgeous planet, which is our life source and which should be of prime importance to us over anything we would ever do in any other universe, so to speak, in any other space, in any other outer area. Life on the planet and the planet itself is our main concern. And like I say, though we'd like to take up so many more personal issues, we are forced to take up the scourging problem of Mother Nature being raped and savaged and denied, and our very lifehood being denied. And we are led astray. We allow ourselves to be led astray. All the images and thoughts we hear bear no resemblance to these realities to which we should be paying attention, and which sustain us when they are correct and in balance. No, but our minds are set in directions all distracted from the fundamentals of what is at stake. I heard someone say on C-SPAN when environmental regulations were being discussed, a caller called in and said, all we think about is birds and fish, as this was a complaint, that all people think about is birds and fish. Well, my goodness, I hope we think about how many fish there are in the sea, how many fish there are in the waters, how much water there is for us to drink, how much potable water there is, how many birds are flying, how many gorillas still live in the forest, how many ants still properly walk in areas where they're supposed to, and ladybugs fly, and butterflies live. I don't even want to contend with the selfish notion that what's in their interests is also in ours, as in the chain of life and the necessity for life to go on in its most fundamental and correct fashion. I don't even want to pose the utilitarian argument. I want to pose the existential argument that life in all its glory and beauty is what it is, and what should be protected in and of itself just for the sake of life as being the ultimate that we could be careful of. I heard the administration use a phrase now that they are trying to change values or bring values to people. If you want to bring values to people, bring value of the monarch butterfly, of the water being pure, of the air being clean, of the life being less stressed, of the animals being able to survive, of us being able to have enough oxygen, of us being able to feast our eyes and live amongst what is our God-given sustenance, sunshine protected by an ozone layer, and days of sunshine in normal proportion to days of rain, and normal kinds of shadings of gray on days that are cloudy, etc., etc. If we want to have values, to be the stewards of the earth, to revere earth, to protect earth, what else is there? And the utilitarian argument that in doing that, we protect ourselves. Another thing regarding the current, so to speak, administration is recently there is a confusion there because they've been noted to not be pro-environment, and they take umbrage at that characterization. But for a while there, something recently was put forward saying that global warming was being caused by human activity, and that it was a serious threat. And then, of course, it was rescinded because very many in the framework of the administration kind of philosophy, if you will, were critical that this went out to the public as a stance that would be taken. So there's a kind of confusion, and I believe the confusion is there because it's not a heartfelt thing. If it were heartfelt, we'd all be hurrying up to do what is right. It's not a heartfelt thing, nor is it really understood, because if we understood, if we could feel the pain of stories, horrors, what word do I want to apply to it, of millions of monarch butterflies lying dead on the forest floor because of logging and fragmentation of the forest by human hands. If you can understand the pain, then you would have a clear direction. It wouldn't be confused. It wouldn't be about face. And you would have values of Mother Earth, life, and the sustenance of nature, the sustenance of the beautiful planet we have the privilege of being a part of. We'll never domineer it. We never own it. We'll never control it. We have the privilege to live and admire it and be sustained and uplifted by it. The privilege. And we abuse that privilege. But anyway, back to that report that I was mentioning, the head of the EPA, the current head, so to speak, of the EPA, on this and other issues too have been like this, stated recently she knew nothing of that report. In other words, when it was announced by the head executives of the administration, apparently there had been no communication to the very Environmental Protection Agency that this report would be posited, and of course it was later taken back. So this just shows you where the priorities are, where the values are. We're very concerned to protect business and enterprise at all costs, such as allowing new utility production to not have latest technology against contaminants into the air. We're gung-ho on anything that makes money at whatever cost, and I don't believe in a cost-benefit analysis. We're gung-ho. We've not seen any genuine bringing to light and bringing to some kind of justifiable conclusion the Enron situation, etc., etc. But we do see carte blanche for business as usual, business as the top priority, business at all costs, to health, to happiness, to liberty, to life, and to the pursuit of knowing that you're doing and being in your proper perspective to this planet on which you live. Right now, also environmentally, I saw something that read that 100, no more than 100, several hundreds of 55-gallon barrels or drums, 55-gallon, probably the typical barrels. Hundreds of these are stored in a tent at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory where nuclear weapon research is done in the San Francisco area. And they're just stored there, and I wonder what kind of material these drums are made out of to boot. You'll recall we've had a couple of shows with physicists from MIT who talked about, answered questions to what radioactive materials are about and what kind of means are necessary to contain them, etc. And I hope to have more shows on that. But again, I read hundreds of these 55-gallon drums or barrels in a tent in the San Francisco area with radioactive material sitting in them that isn't yet stored, isn't placed somewhere. One of many of radioactive material sitting around, relatively watched, but also way too prolific, way too common, way too easy to obtain, and way too serious and doubtful an enterprise to be engaged in to begin with, to get into such unsafe circumstances. I also wanted to make mention of genetic modification as such a bad thing as it is. It's already going full speed ahead. So many of the foods that we're ingesting have genetically modified parts to them, and apparently aren't required to tell this to people, to list it. So it's already in the food supply quite heavily. Who knows what it's doing to us or what will it do to us, but I wanted to make particular mention of Monsanto and perhaps other companies getting patents and trying to get the government to say that it's lawful for them to make seeds that do not reproduce. Sterile seeds. Imagine that. And then they can own the seeds, and when you need seeds to plant, you'll have to go to them to buy them. You cannot have your own seeds from your own crops and rejuvenate your crops this way. What a horrible, horrible commercial thought. What a gross thought. What a 1984 nightmare of a thought, to say the least, of cross-contamination of sterile seeds with other kinds of plants that don't have this genetic engineering, and ruining other life that is still in its wholesome state. Horrors all around. They are so abundant. This is what should be out in the media. This is what should be advertised to you. This is what you should hear in your commercials. This is what you should know about. These are the things that are so profound. Now, I'm going to diverge from the environmental topic to the second aspect of slapping in your face. Terrific problem, terrific pain beyond pain, grief beyond grief, and thank goodness it's not you or I. Easy for me to say. I'm going to tell you some very grievous situation. And when I do, may I please ask you, Victor, for my glasses? You see that bag right over there, please? Yes. No, in the front part, in the, yes, in the blue. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Victor is our cameraman, helping me out here. Thank you very much, Victor Costa. Thank you. All right. Now, this information, I'm talking about animal research, is so, or thinking about it, or reading about it, or allowing yourself to know about it is so crippling, is so painful, I find myself keeping it out of my awareness. It's too painful, too painful. When I try to read about it, it's too gross. And something crossed my desk the other day, and it's all around, it's in every country, and I couldn't even read it. It's all like this. I couldn't read it, but I'm going to read it to you. It'll be where I'm reading most of it, because it's so bad, and it needs to be told, and it should be our #1 priority of the whole world, because if we want to irradiate ourselves, if we want to burn everything down, cause droughts, cause animals to die, get our water impure, make the air bad, go ahead, if we want to be so stupid. But leave the animals alone. Don't you dare use life and cause sentient pain where creatures have to endure a kind of pain that Jesus Christ himself physically did not know. Now, this information comes from the New England Anti-Vivisection Society. And it's just one of so many. And I'm going to show you the pamphlet. Looks like this. There you see the poor little kitty. He's really in the laboratory, and some really horrible stuff is going to happen to him. And then take a look at this kitty, and I'm going to tell you what actually happens to these cats. What actually happens. The New England Anti-Vivisection Society writes, "Dear friend, in a Boston laboratory, a cat is immobilized in a metal device." Those are the stereotaxic instruments, where they pierce the eardrum to fasten the brain into place, drill into the skull to place the electrode where they want it to go, to study, I don't like that word, to study the brain of a helpless, hapless, defenseless animal. Electrodes are inserted into his brain, and substances are injected while he is awake and unanesthetized. This cat will never be held in loving arms. For him, the horrible experiment will end only in death. The cat described above is part of an ongoing experiment that has already sapped over $3 million tax dollars since 1992. He and others like him will live and die in laboratories. Researchers are receiving millions of dollars in federal grants to conduct experiments on cats and kittens, even though experts agree there is no way to extrapolate the findings to humans. And the New England Anti-Vivisection Society is launching a campaign to educate the public, cat shelters, and the media about these experiments going on right now. Another example is a Rhode Island hospital. Piero Biancani pours acid into cats' esophagi to cause inflammation and spasms in the esophagus. He has received over $2 million tax dollars in the last 5 years. At the UMass Medical School, David Pydarfar puts cats' heads into vises, cuts open their necks, exposes their nerves, and crushes them. That research has cost us approximately 1.5 million tax dollars since 1993. At Harvard University, J. Allen Hobson uses restraining devices so that the cats he experiments on can't move. And there are books and hardware shows of these kinds of devices. You can attend conventions of all these devices to drill into the brain and immobilize bodies and get right into the nerve spot you want to get into. Companies exist making these kinds of instruments to use animals like dish rags or ashtrays or incinerators or the worst thing you can think of. So this person at Harvard uses these restraining devices so the cats can't move. Then he breaks their skulls and implants electrodes in their brains and muscles so that he can study sleep. He's received $3.5 million tax dollars since 1992. He also injects substances into the cat's brains while they are unanesthetized and awake. So what Neves has done is they've sent a card that you can, Neves is the New England Anti-Vivisection Society. You can contact Neves to get a copy of this, which would be great. Let me see if their phone number is listed here. Yes, 523-6020, 523-6020 in the 617 area code. When I edit this show, I will have that information for you at the back of the show, and you can get from them a postcard which writes to the director of the National Institutes of Health, the national organization in Washington that decides who gets what money for what kind of research, and you can sign your name saying you do not want money to go for this kind of research. So please contact the New England Anti-Vivisection Society at 617-523-6020 and help these poor animals. And people say, well, aren't these animals anesthetized? And as Neves points out, surgeries are typically done with anesthesia. But animals who aren't intentionally killed when the surgery is over must endure a recovery period as well as other post-surgical procedures. So it's like this. With the best of care, with researchers saying, we take such great care you should only see, and invite you to the lab to look. Would you want your skull crushed? Would you want electrodes planted in your brain? Would you want to wake up and be in that condition with the best of care? With people just lullabying you and coo-cooing to you? Which of course is not the reality, and were it, I'm sure you'd rather be out on the street unelectroded and skull crushed. Animals have to live for years with the injuries inflicted. They can include brain damage, surgical alterations, having their eyes sewn shut, if it's part of the experimental need. The animal is used for whatever the need is. If you need to study nerve conduction, go in there, cut throat, crush the nerve, study it. If you need to study an area of the brain, go through the eardrums, fasten the apparatus, drill into the skull, get the electrode in there, and study it. You're just a thing. The animal is a thing. How would our children want their pets to be in laboratories? And why is one animal more deserving of this than another? Furthermore, even when anesthetics are used, many are very outmoded, such as inhaled ether. And sometimes they go light on it because they want the animal to be not totally sedated. And also, it's pointed out in this information that these experiments are not necessary to save human lives. I do not care about that element. That's a whole other topic. I care about animals in pain and doing this to animals, which is immoral, cruel, unjustified in and of itself to make life suffer this way. I think the only way for someone to understand this, if they don't already, is to become a subject in an experiment. And don't forget, it's the subjects we have that can't vote, that we can take advantage of, that we are powerful over, that end up being used. And we're really using the word used. And so from a practical point of view, New England Anti-Vivisection Society points out that due to known differences in neuroanatomy between us and cats, for example, animal models cannot prove hypotheses about humans. But as I say, even be that as it may, and we know that real clinical trials of things really begin on the human population. So please join the New England Anti-Vivisection Society in this mission, and this is one of so many. Now, I said I might touch upon some politics, and maybe I will in just 5 minutes remaining. Some very quick points. So we've been through environment, animal rights, our #1 concern, and politics, which so affect how we live and what the world is that we're going into. I want to say, in terms of national security, why have we not initially closed our borders very tight, as so many other countries have done that are nowhere near as advanced as us? There are other countries that have such more progressed measures of how to make people secure that we could take examples from. Why are we not more secure at our borders? Why are we not making sure that people have visas if they're in the country, and if they don't, seeing to it that there's good, legitimate reasons for them to be here, or non-hurtful and non-problematic reasons for them to be here as far as our safety and security goes? Certainly, it's been known way before September 11th that there were all kinds of improper accessories brought onto airplanes and incidents happening on airplanes, and yet no firmer measures for security were taken, and even now measures are so really lacking. Cargo goes mostly unsurveyed. Why do these kinds of things, if you have a catastrophe hit you, why do you not batten down the hatches right where you are and make sure everything is safe and secure before you go off running around trying to incinerate and pulverize places and spaces not immediately part of your existence? We're not in a war right now. It's called a war. It's not been defined a war. We have to get a definition of exactly what we're in, because technically we are not in a war. And we're coming into a lot of problems like the current one with how we handle people we find to be inimical to our safety, because we don't have proper definitions. We don't have proper structure for the situation that we're in to begin with. And we're certainly advanced and sophisticated enough to be delineating these things and taking the sane and rational approach a priori before we go helter-skelter all over the place, causing damage. And also we should be careful in how we deal with people who would like to fell us, who would like to cause us great harm and twist us and turn us and make us into beasts. We should be very careful, because when people are of this mindset and filled with a vitriol that would make them want to cause such perverted harm, we have to deal with them carefully. We have to deal with them acceptably. We have to deal with them sensibly. We can't deal with them in an angry, off-the-cuff, unpremeditated, considered, leveraged fashion. We have to be very careful. If you were dealing with someone who were that determined and whose mind had evolved to that point to act as what so-called terrorists do, would you not handle with kid gloves what you were doing instead of rashly going about being violent yourself? And it's also kind of unusual when we see wars possibly breaking out in other areas to have persons that promote a lot of this incurring of damage in other parts all over the globe, to stand up and say to people who also want to do the same thing, war is not the solution. To have that come out of the very mouths of people that use damage and incineration as a solution. And finally, we're too narcissistic, as was one show that I had examining the narcissism of ourselves, where we're too caught up in how we are, whether we're right or wrong. Not the point. The point is being blind to be able to see that we're caught up in ourselves and have to step back and get a bigger perspective, even to understand, not forgive, not excuse, but to get a better grip on what it is that we're up against. And just remember now, as all these new so-called cases are coming to light, many of them not to light because they're held in secret, all these new persons being detained, etc. Just remember, in the United States of America, the land that is supposed to be free and the freedom that we supposedly fight for, we don't play loose and fast with people's lives, with no people's lives. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? We are fighting for the dignified, controlled, not excusing, but the controlled and intelligent response. And we have, that's what we're famous for, all these procedures in place that have been reasoned over time of how to manage situations such as the ones we're facing now, so that we don't lose our sensibility, that we don't become savages. And finally, I would say we don't know enough in general. We simply do not know enough about most things. It's not coming through the media. It's not in our diet. Things that are really not just important because they're issues, forget that, but things that are really relevant. Instead, we're in la-la land of inanity. Most of the stuff feeding our brain is either stress material of trivia that we have to take care of, or nonsense material that really has no bearing on what life is all about and what really matters when it comes right down to it, and when you got to die and leave this earth, and the basic principles of what's the point to begin with. And remember that in all of this, business and corporations, maybe American, maybe European, maybe from other areas, world conglomerate businesses. They're not just specific to this country or other countries. World conglomerate businesses are leading the way, are making the policies, are doing the regulations. So not to have hate, not to be vengeful, just to have more reason, to more sense, to get a grip on yourself, to be broader, to be bigger, to open up your mind and open up your understanding, not to forgive, but just to get hipper and more aware of what's around, why it's happening, how to handle it in a reasoned, sophisticated, progressive, enlightened way that we are supposed to be famous for. I say good night to you. I thank you very much for watching this evening. Please tune in again, and I hope to see you soon. Good night.
This is another song I wrote called Environment. The wrongest things you can do is search after environment, even though environment has everything to do with behavior. It cannot be a savior for you. When you have the prettiest pool and a lifestyle that looks like paradise, you may say what you're searching after is something you have to do not realize.
Get the animals out of the laboratory. You wanna get the animals out of the laboratory. Hey, the monkeys. Hey, the monkeys. Hey, the monkeys. Belong in trees. Let the animals go. Let the animals go. Let the animals go. You gotta respect life. You gotta respect life. Volunteer yourself. If you need a brain, volunteer yourself. But let the animals go. Let the animals go. Let the animals go. Let the animals go. Let the animals go.
go sad.